Actually, not
Good
as
heavens.
many as there should have been. As far
Right.
as I'm
I
concerned.
got to draw some Jack Kirby stuff.
I mean, you know, Eisner got more attention, it seemed. He had no formal training as an artist. His father worked in the garment district and lost his job when Jack was about 16. So he had no formal education at all after about the age of 15 or 16. He worked under a variety of pseudonyms, doing all kinds of drawing until he landed his first regular comic book gigs, including a brief period at the Fleischer Studio, the creators of Betty Boop and Popeye, amongst other things, where he drew he was an in-betweener, basically drawing the drawings in between the main drawings as part of the animation cells, which is one of the reasons that I think his work has such extraordinary flow to the action sequences. It's because he learned early on as an animator. But he hated animation. He felt it was too much like factory work and having to do the same drawing over and over again, and much preferred comics. Anything else?
No, besides. I would just say thanks, everybody. It was wonderful.
I would say he was one of the most prolific artists in comic book history. Few people have drew as many pages as he did, and the in-betweening, I'm sure, was great training. If you're drawing a similar in-betweening, you're just slightly changing it, and but it's essentially the same drawing over and over again. If you then get to draw a different illustration in this panel and a different illustration in this panel, then you can see how you might have a momentum because of the enthusiasm for that, and take the muscles you earned in that factory style and then blow it up in the comic book format. But I'm just amazed at especially in the 60s and early 70s, no one touched that kind of output.
Well, I would say there's not much original work being done these days, but we're still feeding off and making billions of dollars off this man's creations.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, that's the other important thing, right, which needs to get mentioned as part of the story. Jack worked his entire life under a work-for-hire contract system, and never received a single royalty for any of the characters that he created. By the time in the late 80s and early 90s, at which point you would find not just characters that he created, but images that he drew on lunchboxes, on the packaging for action figures, on T-shirts. It got to the point where he felt unable to go to the mall at Christmas time because it made him physically sick to see so many of his creations and actual drawings that he had done, and know that neither he nor his family were getting anything for it.
Which, by the way, I can still buy stuff at Walmart with Jack Kirby drawings on it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And they do.
Yeah.
But because of I think, compassion and enthusiasm supporters and fans of his work had, the system has largely changed. And for an example, I've made more money on royalties this year drawing Jack Kirby characters just this month than Jack Kirby did in his whole entire career. So but as tragic as it was the way he was treated, because of a lot of the revolution that was inspired towards the end of his lifetime, people who came afterwards, like myself, got to benefit from the fights that he fought. So there's a lot more consciousness about creator rights and fairness, and sharing in the success of something.
And Marvel and Disney also recently settled with his estate for an undisclosed sum. I'd take a guess at least $50 million.
So at least his ancestors will benefit from his labors.
So every time I go see a movie or I watch something that I know Jack Kirby was directly responsible for, I like to freak out the ticket agent, grab my ticket, say, "Thanks, Jack," and then I walk off. That's true, and I hope you all do the same. My name's Georgia. I know. All right. Now, does anybody have any questions? Because if anybody gives an excessively awesome question to one of these fine folks, I'm going to give them this Madman trade that you might be able to get Mike and Laura to sign.
Isn't that in Italian?
It is.
Learn
cooler.
a foreign language.
Just saying. Anybody? I'm moving aside. And here we go.
Sure.
Mike Plavin?
Yeah, of course. I mean, So, other than the in-betweening, what else helped Jack come up with the art style that, because his art style is unique, right? And so, and then Mike, what from, Jack was obviously a huge influence on you. How so? So that's a question for both of you.
Okay, that's a great question. Kirby's style actually keeps evolving, and I think that if he had lived, he might have gone into like full-blown abstraction. He starts out as almost a kind of naive realist who's enormously influenced by the great newspaper adventure artists of his generation, so that would have been people like Alex Raymond and Milton Caniff, who would have been his biggest influences. But he couldn't render like Raymond. I mean, nobody could. And he didn't have the chiaroscuro photorealism of a Caniff. So his style becomes increasingly abstract and monumental and page-filling and crazy, actually. I mean, full-blown psychedelic. You got some examples of late Kirby? Can we put something?
Late Kirby?
That's a nice. I mean, that's a mid-period, but it gives you a sense of where he could go. In the '60s, on the Fantastic Four, he makes a breakthrough into what I think of as kind of cosmic Kirby. This isn't a bad example because you could. This is meant to be. This is Dr. Doom's laboratory, and it's about shape, and you know that you could definitely you remove the lettering and the superhero figures, and you put that up on the wall, and what you have there is, I don't know, like a late Kandinsky or something. I mean, it's about abstract shapes that are a triumph of the machinery. I love Kirby's machines. No, they don't do anything. They are an absolute triumph of form over function. So that kind of, this is a nice, again, more sort of,
That's later stuff.
late, high abstract. So his style becomes more and more abstract and challenging. And it would be really interesting to speculate. I mean, people speculate, people like Ken Kesey were into this work because they imagined, I think, that what they'd found was a fellow acid head visionary. I don't know that Kirby ever did anything like that. I think that it
Couldn't
was.
imagine.
That was a question.
I think it was just
Is
something
that a question?
That was one of my questions.
Do you
yeah,
ask him?
I think it just, no, I just think
Oh.
I don't think Kirby took, I don't know, but I don't think Kirby ever took acid. I think it was just I think it was natural, and I think it was.
No, I meant, did you ever take?
I mean, if he did, I kind of don't want to know about it, because
I'm on camera.
His war experiences certainly influenced him as well. Who knows how that would shock your brain?
Right.
And how many artists or comic book artists came out of real combat experiences and then would spend the great majority of their life sitting at a table working things out. But yeah, he's easily my biggest influence. There's about 10 artists who are really central, who I keep revisiting for inspiration. Kirby would be the top. And his entire span too. Like I take from each of his eras. The very early stuff, there was kind of a bendy, stretchy kind of, but more realistic. Where he's his efforts are to be more realistic than later stuff. And then even if you just look at his Marvel work, like Fantastic Four #1, which is very simple. And then you just go a couple, he's kind of like the Beatles in the 60s, where you see the Beatles in 1964, it's just very simple. But then by 1967, it's like,
Yeah.
just filling every corner. And Kirby, something happened with him too. It could have been the era, but it's really thrilling to see that explosion taking place. And it's why Fantastic Four, the Kirby issues are my favorite comics of all time. And then my favorite story of all time is what's referred to now as the Galactus trilogy, which introduced Galactus and Silver Surfer. It's Fantastic Four 48, 49, and 50. And I just think it's one of the coolest stories where Silver Surfer, which is the series I just finished for Marvel with Dan Slott, he's a herald of Galactus, who's pretty much just mindlessly finding planets for Galactus to devour. And he's touched this almost soulless creature who's just spent eons going through the entire universe, all of a sudden his soul is touched by humans, you know, the Fantastic Four, and Alicia, who's the Thing's, Ben Grimm, the Thing's girlfriend. I just love that story so much. I could just go on and on about it, but the main reason why I love it is because of what happens with Silver Surfer and where he turns against his boss, Galactus, at his, you know, risking his own life. And but I'll because of the time limitation, I can see myself already trying to say more stuff than I should focus in on. But
Let me ask this.
yes, major influence.
Can anybody tell me where this is from?
Is that from the Argo stuff?
I don't know, you tell me.
I think it is.
Is that correct, Ben?
I actually don't know where that's from.
Oh my gosh.
Argo. Anybody see the movie Argo? Won Best Picture, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Jack Kirby was doing some artwork for a movie that the CIA and other secret, they made a fake movie production to rescue Americans by saying that they were going to do this movie, and Jack Kirby did all the production art on it.
You know, the reason I watched the movie, I wanted to see who played Jack Kirby. Was he did someone play him in the movie?
Yeah, it's like real small.
Yeah, that's on.
Also, somebody plays John Chambers. I think John, I'm blanking. John Chambers was the makeup artist who created the Planet of the Apes makeup. So when I was a kid, he was like a hero to me.
Right.
I wanted to be a makeup artist like John Chambers because I love the Planet of the Apes movie so much. But John Goodman, he plays, doesn't he play John Chambers?
Hold on, let me check.
Yeah.
Going to IMDb right now.
But I remember also reading that John Chambers was paid $1 million to do the makeup for Planet of the Apes, and I thought, wow, this guy has $1 million. But of course, that he walked home with very little of it. As a kid, I didn't realize that $1 million went into making and costuming everybody. So,
You have a question there.
Guys, thank you for signing it.
He collaborated a lot with Stanley, but did Jack Kirby have a lot of liberty to be able to do what he wanted to do in terms of design stuff, and also do you get any kind of pressure out from like marketing type of stuff to edit what you create?
So to the question of how they work together.
Yeah, like you said that he had to change the mask and couldn't.
Yeah, so no, this is one of the most controversial questions and probably will never be fully resolved. Partly because it became much more important a few years later when the IP value of these properties started to spike. At the time that Stan and Jack were initially working together, neither of them really had the hubris to imagine that these properties would be worth millions and millions of dollars. And so there wasn't the hugest amount of, Jack didn't push very hard to have himself credited. But the way they actually work, and the animation industry is similar today, Jack would, Stan might give a story note, and it might be as little as a sentence. Bring Galactus back. No, bring Dr. Doom back would be more likely probably. Bring Dr. Doom back this time, and now I've got to go and do something else. Jack would then go and would draw out in pencil the whole 22-page book, and would write dialogue notes on the side of on the edge of the board. Those would then be inked, and they would be lettered and then inked. And when they were lettered, that's when Stan would actually write the script. So from the perspective of what most of us think of as writing, which is designing, plotting, pacing, is all done by Jack. And then what Stan did was write so he would always take the credit of writer and editor, but actually what he did was write the dialogue on top of the boards that Jack provided him. So what he was a dialogue writer. And quite often the dialogue came directly from notes that Jack gave him on the side of the board. So, so Stan's contribution is much smaller than Stan has generally admitted to the world. He has always been very generous in crediting Jack and Steve and other people for the way they realized his ideas so brilliantly. That is how Stan puts it, right? They turned they were the best illustrators of my ideas. But I think after a certain point, certainly after Marvel's production period, when the number of books they're doing on a monthly basis really starts to increase in the mid-60s, there is simply no way that Stan is doing what we would generally call writing of those books. It's all being done by the artists.
For you, how is it different? Have you ever had any pressure to change whatever you created because of the marketing? Did it be more palatable?
Very rarely. I can only remember 3 or 4 occasions ever where I had to change something I'd already drawn. Or one time, I'm reminded of it because I saw Matt had a copy of Superman Madman, but it's the only creator-owned character to ever cross over with Superman, my Madman character. And I had a scene where I had them sitting in swing sets, and DC editorial was like, Superman would never sit in a swing. So I got my guy sitting in a swing, and I got Superman like that right next to him. I just thought that was funny. Like, why
Who
couldn't...
asked that question?
That's really lame. DC editorial, really, of course he could sit in a swing.
Yeah. But, yeah, I've been real lucky that way. And the way Ben described the process, there's something called the Marvel method where, and it's because of this, I think, where the artist would in Jack's case, would just go to town. But what that evolved into would be a loose outline from the writer, whether it was Roy Thomas or whoever, and the artist would get kind of like a list of all the things that are to take place in the story. So the artist would then draw it, it would come back, and then the writer would then, based on what the artist drew, fill in what's being said and kind of dialogue it. And I'd never done that before. I always insist on, if I'm working with a writer, I want a full script. I want the writer to do their full job. And nobody ever had a problem with that. But with Silver Surfer, Dan Slott convinced me to find a happy medium with that. And I found it very satisfying, where I would get a very detailed outline, and actually there'd be a lot of dialogue and stuff in it too. And I found it very freeing to then just take that and just kind of let myself go. And then Dan would then get further inspired by what I had done. And what resulted would be, when the published book came out, I could have looked at the PDF before it was printed to see how it all came out, but I got a big kick out of waiting for the actual printed book to come out and see what Dan had done with the final dialogue and everything. And it was always a big kick to see how he just kind of blew it up and had found all these little moments that I didn't even see in my own work. So I found that, at least with Dan, I found it very satisfying.
Did you get a different credit on that? Did you get a co-creator credit?
Storyteller.
Storyteller.
It says storytellers, Dan Slott, Michael Allred.
Right.
So
See, that's the credit is different. I mean, the animation industry right now works quite similarly. I was talking to a graphic novelist who's become an animator in LA, Sarah Alexic, about this a couple of years ago. She was working on Regular Show and some other shows like that. And they were getting, as an animator, she was getting a one-page treatment from a writer, which she was the person that was then turning that into a 22-minute sequence of beats. And really, essentially, from her point of view, actually writing it on the basis of a story note. But they wouldn't give writing credit, which means you don't get, it's a different royalty rate, So in the comics industry, precisely because of what happened to people like Jack, people have worked out that you need to credit people differently if this is the creative arrangement. I think other industries are still just figuring this one out, it seems.
I think it's important to note historically that also comic book creators, writers, and artists rarely got credit at all.
Right.
You'd look at the older comics in the Golden Age, and very rarely do you see the names of the creators. one of the things I give Stanley huge credit for was he made celebrities out of the teams. So and he'd have nicknames for them, Jolton Jack, and
Smiling Steve Ditko, which I doubt he ever did.
yeah.
Steve Areno. Was
Well, no,
Ditko
it's-
ever a Steve Areno? I doubt it.
And I think he realized that there was this community of fandom that could be, blown out of the artists. And it was fun then you'd pick your favorite artists and you could see who inked who. Because Jack Kirby rarely inked, ever.
Well, who's got time for that?
Yeah. But you'd also then start sorting out who inked him. And like Mike Royer, who was going to be here today, is always listed at least in the top 3 best Kirby inkers ever. It's almost always Joe Sinnott, Mike Royer, and Dick Ayers. I just did a Bug series, which is a New Gods spin-off. New Gods was part of this amazing fourth world concept that he created for DC Comics after he left Marvel. And one of my favorite characters that was only ever in 2 books was a character named Forager the Bug. And so we did a whole series and so I've met and talked with Mike Royer before, but I was especially excited to see him again because he inked every Bug page that Jack Kirby ever drew, and so I was gonna have him sign all my stuff.
I do want to segue into something like that. Who had the question? Hold on to that, please. What's your name again? I'm sorry, I'll stop that. Because New Gods is honestly one of my favorites of all times.
So good.
Let me see.
Yeah,
Anybody know what
there's a
Dragonvine
New
is?
Gods Bug
Yeah.
page right there.
I know, I wasn't able to find your favorite one that you told me, but that's that and the cover.
They're all my favorites.
They're all, it's just what a great design. I honestly believe, a
That's
good friend of mine.
right there. And he's only called Forager because that's his job description.
A
He's
good friend of
he's a
mine is
forager.
character designer. I think one of the greatest character designers was Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
His designs just rock my world. They're amazing.
Any
So-
one of those insectoid characters could easily be celebrated and blown up into their own book. Because each one of those designs is just crazy cool. And yet you never see any of those characters ever again. It's just on that one page.
There are
Except
2
Bug, of
people-
course.
There are 2 people that sponsored all of us getting together. Dragonvine Comics and Gifts, and you know where that is? Anybody been there? If you haven't, get over there, but get ready for your eyeballs to pop out of your head. And, did John leave? Oh,
Dragonvine donated the iZombie figures.
yes. And they also sponsored this, so because I'm an enormous New Gods fan, one of you is gonna win, and by the way, I'll let you kind of figure out what I looked at when I drew this. One of you is gonna win that original right there.
Ooh, that's a nice one.
So I did that just for the panel,
Yes.
and again, I wonder what I looked at to be inspired by it. I just wonder.
Oh, more love for Jack Kirby, by the way. If talking about the New Gods, you learn there's this all-encompassing energy called the Source, and there's a character named Darkseid, and his son is the hero, Orion. George Lucas
You guys want to enter?
will happily admit
Name and email.
the influence and inspiration he
And I'll let
got
you
from
know
Jack
if you want.
Kirby. But when there's so much in New Gods that directly goes right into Star Wars, it's crazy.
And actually, Darkseid is also a pretty clear influence on the Thanos concept as well. So even
Yeah.
Yes.
So
You're not supposed to say, yeah, he kind of created Thanos too.
Yeah,
No,
I mean, you
yes,
know,
he kind of did.
Jim Starlin would admit it. I'm sure that the line of influence is something that Starlin would admit, but it means that Kirby really is everywhere.
Yeah, just one quick thought. Is everybody familiar with Adam Warlock? So big characters that sprung out of the 70s, but he also is a Jack Kirby creation because he first appeared as him in Fantastic Four before he had a name. And with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, at the very end, they hint of Adam in the gold sarcophagus, the cocoon. So it's very likely that Adam Warlock could possibly then be a future popular Marvel movie character, the way Guardians of the Galaxy's exploded.
Who can answer
And
the
again,
question?
from
What
Jack
Guardians of the
Kirby.
Galaxy character did Jack Kirby create? Raise your hand if you know. Which Guardians of the Galaxy character did
I
Jack Kirby create?
am And where did he come from? Before Marvel Comics proper started,
Yep, there it is.
there were, yes, the monster books. Tales to Astonish is the title that Ant-Man came from. Tales from Suspense was a monster comic that Iron Man then came from. But yeah, there's Groot in his monster comic incarnation. You've had your hand up.
I just was curious because as many iconic characters Jack has created, do you find it hard to create new characters or new original creations because that he's created so much that's covered so much a span of
Oh,
years?
me, no. Because it's a funny thing when you're drawing a comic, and in my case, I also write my own, create-own comics. When you're drawing it, your brain is just So by the time you finish drawing a comic, you've got a zillion other ideas that you'll never have the time to draw. So I've got this outline of things that I want to happen with my Madman character that I will never finish in my lifetime. And with Silver Surfer, for instance, similarly, he's constantly going to new worlds, and I was constantly having to create new alien races. While I'm drawing this issue, knowing what the story is for the next issue, I'm already brainstorming while I'm drawing those new things. So the designs and elements, and I'm watching a movie or a TV show, and it's like, I like how that button looks. I like how that lapel looks. Those shoes are interesting. And you just kind of branch off into these other design elements that just stockpile in your head. And same with characterizations, like, ooh, that character, because of his personality, reacts to this woman's personality this way. It's like a Rubik's Cube, and you shift it around and you just kind of get these different combinations of storytelling and design. And so for me, I find that I will never be able to have the time to draw all the things that are just lining up in my head and wanting to get out on paper.
Steve, you have a question?
Steve, yeah. Hey, you mentioned
AKA
Kirby's
Greg.
PTSD and maybe how that changed him or affected his art, emotional. Can you speak to that personally? Like, does that drive you at all? Is it better to be
My PSD.
even? No, I'm just speaking emotion. Like, it seems like some of the best creators have gone through really
Oh,
bad things.
oh,
And,
yeah.
I mean, do you kind of have to have a dark side to kind of have a
I don't know.
imaginative side?
Kind of have a what?
I would say that the horrible things that have happened in my life have made me appreciate the wonderful things that have happened in my life. So I think I have a full appreciation of that spectrum of tragedy to bliss. So it helps, I appreciate it. I would have liked to avoid horrible tragedies in my life or mental, anguish.
Oh, by the way, guys, the list that's going around, put your name and email on that. I'm gonna draw from that to find out who wins this, and then check your email. All right?
Finally, Kirby was a hero, obviously. Did it change when you did Silver Surfer, and could you identify with his brain maybe a little differently than now that you've gone through that process? Like, do you have did your relationship, I guess, in your head to him change after?
My relationship with Kirby or Silver
Kirby,
Surfer?
like in your head, yeah.
The more I learn about him, and the more because my career is doing my creator stuff, and also then playing in the Marvel and DC universes, where for me it's like fulfilling childhood fantasies, like favorite characters that I get to play with. And since Kirby's the creator who I keep finding myself doing more and more with his work, my next top secret project is another one of his creations. I learn a different facet of him. There's a new appreciation for what might have inspired him. And again, while I'm sitting there and working, I'm thinking about what inspired him with this, and how did this come into being. So yeah, there's a constant stepping up of appreciation and thoughtfulness in him and just the medium as a whole.
Could I say something about the first part of that?
Yes?
I was thinking of, about whether this notion of whether you sort of need the dark side or the trauma to be the creator. I think one of the things about, a lot of people went through World War II. A lot of men of Kirby's generation went through World War II. And I think there's no question that Kirby suffered as a result of those experiences. But you could actually see it the other way and see him as an extraordinarily resilient person who was able to turn these experiences into, he preferred life at the drawing board, I think, to a lot of other things. But that just suggests a way of coping with existence that most of us would like. If you can find your job of work to be both creative and a way that you can mediate the experiences of life, then you've got a good job and you're doing the right thing. And his mind was clearly off making narratives all the time. And Roz, his wife, wouldn't let him drive because he would start spinning stories in his head and would go through lights. And he lived very much in an imaginative place. And I think that actually probably helped him deal with some of this stuff.
And let me actually start this. I'm gonna start this process. I wanna see if we can get some of your stories about what is your favorite Kirby story and why. I'd like to start, because this is the one that got me really falling in love with comic books and wanting to draw comic books. Though it's not my favorite series that he drew. It's when I read this, for some reason, and who's read Commandi?
Yes. Awesome.
Or in Baston, it's Commandi.
Yes.
But that's not your favorite issue, Matt.
That is not my favorite issue, no.
Great
The first issue I read, and then of course I went back and read all of them, and then I started finding out who drew this, and then I found out most of the comics that I loved, that I read up to then, was Jack Kirby. Come on! Oh, jeez. It was this issue right here.
And these are entirely Kirby's creations. He's writing and drawing all this DC work.
It was this issue. That, of course, the cover just by itself made me immediately grab it from the grocery store. What? That's when you got your comics, man. You got to go to the grocery store. You don't get Donna to go run back in the warehouse and grab these things. You got to get it before some kid, spits candy all over it. Oh, it was the best. So the cover just by itself immediately made me want to just buy it. And then it was the story. It was the story, and they never, ever in this whole issue said Superman. They talked about this this story, and all the giant ape creatures was talking about someone called the Mighty One. And it's a story, and I would love for someone to write this, so please, I can illustrate it, of the Mighty One, of when the Earth pretty much had its first apocalypse, and the Mighty One saved the Earth, and how he saved the Earth. And all these ape creatures pretty much are trying to prove that they are the reincarnation of the Mighty One. And so the first thing that Commandi sees, and this is what really just, go, what the heck? Is Commandi just walking around, probably whistling, and then a giant ape creature just goes flying across the, and the way he just goes flying across. And as they get captured by the giant ape creatures, what it was they launched themselves with this giant catapult and die just to prove that they're the Mighty One. I just need a little boost. I need a little kicker up there. No, I got it. Just give me a little boost up. It just, I'm sold. I'm in. And I tell you what, it was more the story that they didn't tell. I mean, that's a general overview right there. But immediately, I could see the whole story in my head. Could be 100 issues of just that story right there, how Superman saved the world, and then it led into Commandi.
And
And I'm
obviously,
surprised no
Jack,
one's drawn it yet.
one thing I have in common with Jack Kirby is we both love Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yes. Anybody have their favorite Jack Kirby story that influenced them and inspired them? Besides these two handsome guys up there?
The one story that made the most impression on me was a story of the Inhumans. And the only image I see is Black Bolt charging up his fist and then punching something. It's like, oh my gosh, that's awesome!
Yeah.
And we didn't know that until later that was Jack Kirby.
Oh, yeah.
I was also very inspired by the Inhumans. One of the creations I was always drawn to was Medusa, because
Oh, yeah.
I love the idea of her having a whole mind of its own, and just having the Humans were something that really inspired me, and just seeing her being that powerful female character in that time of age was really just.
She was my first comic book crush. She's actually tattooed on my back.
Let's, got the camera on?
Take your shirt off.
And actually, the guy that tattooed it here is here as well. Let's get him in here. Jeez.
Chris?
Yeah, Chris 51.
Yeah.
For me, my favorite character has been Iron Man. Not just from, like, you know, because he's a rich guy that made a suit. What it showed me, both in the Jon Favreau movie and in some of the other comics, is this is a guy who was torn down to his bare essentials and was told to survive and to create something new. When I was a kid, when I was 6 years old, I hit my head, and it left a dent in my head. I still have it today. And for a while, I couldn't operate as well as I could. And it wasn't until I, you know, started watching movies with my dad, I kind of grew to love watching movies. And we'd always like, you know, come up with creative ideas of like how to do certain movies. And after he died when I was 10, you know, I was kind of left to my own devices, and I've always had a creative mind, like building with Legos and whatnot. And the character of Iron Man reassured me that, you know, maybe I could become something like Iron Man, create myself in a new way, to create something that people can either look up to and love, or, you know, to just create something.
Yeah, it's a great character.
The inks on these are amazing.
That's me inking Jack Kirby.
Jeez. Little brown nosing right there.
It's
Kinda been there on that one.
a wraparound cover, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, see the
It sure
The
is.
whole thing, man.
Yeah.
I'll be doggone. It's so shiny. You can have that one. Don't have these guys sign that on it.
Seeing Commandy there, I think that was Kirby's most successful DC.
It was the best-selling DC book and the longest running of the DC.
So he had this incredibly ambitious concept with the Fourth World, the Forever People, Jimmy Olsen, which was
Yeah.
his dare.
Which I loved.
He was like, give me your worst-selling book and I'll make it your best-selling book. So he took on Jimmy Olsen. Mr. Miracle. I mean, just, so this huge concept, and it was almost too much. I don't think people knew how to take it in. But you look at what he did in such a short period of time, and these companies are still thriving off of all these creations.
Now, did New God sell very well?
Not really.
It depends on who you talk to. It was also a really weird time in terms of the history of comic book distribution.
And you didn't know how an issue sold for months afterwards.
But it was also a period where newsstand sales were, newsstand sales have always been a bit mob controlled, and there was always a bit of fuzzy numbers, and then the sales of comic book stores were just, sales only to comic book stores was just a couple of years in the future, but people like Phil Seuling had started to sort of figure out that if you there was a collector's market and not just a kid's market. And that if you got stacks of books that were likely to be desirable to collectors, Neil Adams' X-Men, for example, is an example, that legendarily those didn't sell well. But actually, it seems to be the case that a lot of distributors were working out deals with specialist stores, because there weren't very many, to hold back those books, so that when the collectors wanted them, they would pay much, much more for the individual books. So it's possible that Kirby, when he arrived at DC, it was a big deal, and people perceived these books as being likely to become collectible very quickly. And some of them just never showed up on the newsstands because they were being held back by distributors who wanted to sell them for inflated prices later. It's because, this is a really crooked business in the 1970s, actually.
What Jack Kirby character is about to show up in Justice League as the major villain?
Steppenwolf.
Steppenwolf is the answer. Yeah, but that basically means where Steppenwolf shows up. Yeah, he's coming. He's my favorite villain of all times. Anybody watch Justice League Unlimited, where Darkseid and Brainiac just got together, and Superman finally got to let loose of all his full power? And please tell me you saw that.
No.
Oh, really? It's the final episode of Justice League Unlimited. Please watch it.
Okay.
Did you see the
Okay.
Dark Side?
No, I didn't see that.
Weird Al Yankovic voice was Darkseid.
What?
Yes, it's hilarious.
You kidding me, bro?
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
That's awesome, man. Jeez.
Hey, could I comment on your artwork over there?
Yeah.
That you just held up?
Mhm.
I got to watch that in the making. That was many, many days and processes to get to that point. That is an impressive, that lived with me this summer, and I got to watch that process. It was amazing.
Isn't it weird that I kind of like the back of the art?
And what tools did you use to create that, Matt?
What was your favorite material?
Segue. How about this? If you guys come back to my table in the Copic room, wow! If there ain't Jack Kirby characters, just tell my brother, Matt said I could get a super discount on a Jack Kirby character. And say it like that, please. And roll your eyes and go at the end. And I'm not going to tell Jim you're going to do it.
Then they'll
But
know
Deborah
you-
said, Matt said. So
At
there.
the
A
end.
real life John Chris Belushi character come to life.
If you don't mind. I'd love that a lot. Good heavens. Hey, anybody have any questions? Professor Saunders or Mike Allred?
Have you ever had a disagreement between the way you might have, after you let something writer wrote, the way you do it? Have they ever been a little bit of a disagreement between what the writer might have thought it the other when they were writing it, and how they regard it versus you?
Before you answer that, there we go. Good. Go.
Okay. Best way I can think to answer that is, again, when I do my creator-owned stuff, I know how successful I am getting what's here onto the page. Working with a writer, I make an effort to be as faithful to their intentions as possible. And what I've found with these collaborations is what's most rewarding is seeing the chemistry that ultimately results. And I find it surprising, like when I started waiting for the actual book to come out to see, so I get that same thrill that I got with the kid. And in every situation, I think the result has been better than my expectations. So I can't think of a time where the writer didn't make it more than I'd hoped.
I had a quick question. One of my favorite characters is, I love the Fantastic Four. I own most of the comic books, and I've always been fascinated with Sue because she started off very meek and quiet, and then as the series ran, she kind of became more bold, and then she loses her mind to become Malice. With her character specifically, because he started her so shy and quiet, was it interesting to watch her evolve into almost a different person?
Yeah. Well, the reason she is the Invisible Girl is because, you remember, the four characters, their powers pop out of their personalities. And so she's the Invisible Girl because she's so withdrawn. And so it's what potential to see this character arc and see her become one of the most powerful characters in the Marvel Universe. And then their child, who arguably is the most powerful character. So yeah, it's fun that's what's fun about comic books. when a really good comic book has a lifespan like that, where you can see things evolve and change, and if you're familiar with the history, it's that much deeper.
It's also, Sue's arc is really interesting, but it's less, I'd suggest it's less pronounced actually than you might think. There's a website called Kirby Without Words. Does anybody know this website?
No.
I totally recommend it.
Oh.
It's somebody going through and basically photoshopping out all of Stan Lee's dialogue so that you can interpret the images without having that material sort of forcing you one way or the other. And one of the things that you will notice is that Sue's presence is potentially more dynamic. The inevitable jokes about females, Stan's most frequent word, they all go away. It's not the case that, I don't think that you could argue that from the very beginning of the Fantastic Four, there's a more progressive gender politics there. That, you know, it's one of the, for my money, it's one of the weak spots of the early Marvel universe. But it looks a lot less weaker when Stan's dialogue is taken away. I know I'm sounding like I'm really coming down on Stan. My favorite material by Jack is material he did in collaboration with Stan, and I think that Stan brought, I know that The Fourth World is a lot of other people's favorite. I find it unreadable. I think it's gorgeous to look at,
It's
really,
like too much.
really, really hard to process at the level of narrative and plot. I mean, Stan actually brought something to the work. He brought a humor and a kind of
And a discipline.
yeah, humor, discipline, and a kind of humanness. Actually, Jack's characters very quickly become gods. That's what Jack likes. He's up there with the Greeks and the Romans. He's a myth maker. And what Stan was often able to do was humanize these very unlikely and powerful characters. And in some ways, I think, make them, when that's missing, the Fourth World characters are harder for me to relate to. They're operating on a more mythic plane. So I don't want to sound just like I'm bashing Stan. But in the case of Sue, I think quite often, Jack is innovating and making very quickly she develops the force field about 20 issues in, because they realize that just turning invisible isn't enough. And once she has the force field, she can be in a more aggressive character and is not just a kidnap victim, which is what she is really for, I think, the first 15 issues.
I liked seeing the progression of her, especially when she's like throwing invisible daggers and like creating invisible force fields over people's heads. I mean, she really, like you said, went from nothing to very powerful, and it was really great to watch that as a kid.
I agree. Not defending Fourth World, but to further explain it, I think Jack felt constrained a lot at Marvel, and underappreciated. And so when DC kind of said, hey, come here and do whatever you want, because when you see the credits, it not just written and drawn by Jack, but edited by Jack. That's a dangerous situation to be in, because I benefited from, my editors have always been one of our greatest collaborators. For instance, Shelley Bond, in many ways, is a co-creator of iZombie. We wouldn't have made iZombie the way we did if it wasn't for Shelley. And the same with Axel Alonso on Ecstatics and X-Force, and Tom Brevoort with FF and Silver Surfer. The editors I have found are really key. A really good editor is really key to kind of help you sculpt and direct things. He or she is going to be the person that says, hey, you introduced this character back here, and I thought it was because this character was going to come in and be a part of this thing. And you might go, you're right, I forgot that. And when you look at the Fourth World stuff, what Jack Kirby was doing at DC, again, come to DC, you can do whatever you want. It was this explosion of ideas, and they just kind of went boom. And so when you look at all the Fourth World stuff, there's this really great, the hardcover collection puts everything in the order that it was meant to be read. So you'll read an issue of Forever People, and then you turn the page, and the next one will be an issue of Mr. Miracle, and then New Gods. And it's really interesting to read it that way. It's a lot more helpful, because a lot of this stuff, if you're only reading New Gods and you're not reading Forever People, there's a lot of stuff that's being referred to, but man, all of this stuff, like the mother box and again with the sword, all of it's just, Kirby was just going, boom! All of these ideas just went, bleh. And it really needed somebody to just kind of, it needed a Stan Lee to be like, wait, let's focus this stuff, let's pull this in here and let's pull this in here. Because if you just look at it as a big pot of ideas, it's the most amazing thing that ever happened in the history of comics. But if you approach it as a reading experience, then yeah, it can be really frustrating.
Carlos Speed McNeil, great cartoonist, described reading the Fourth World as like drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah.
And I think that's about right.
I got a challenge for you guys. We'll call this Stump Ben Saunders. It's not a violent thing. It's not a physical
No.
act. It's really questions.
No, it's too easy to do.
Kane Ben Saunders, physically. If anybody has a question, or can question about Jack Kirby, and Ben can't answer it, you're going to get this Essentials Fantastic Four. Who can stump Ben Saunders? Oh, Steve. Greg.
Steve, a.k.a. Greg.
He was a joke. What's his favorite color?
What's his favorite color?
Oh.
There it is.
Blue. No.
There you go.
And you don't know?
All of them.
All of them.
Kirby Green.
That's cheating. Can't say all of them. That's cheating.
Did you stump Ben Saunders?
I don't know the answer to that.
He stumped Ben Saunders.
He stumped Ben Saunders. I'm not done.
Who rocked high-waisted pants better than Jack Kirby?
Oh, Ben, you tell me. You don't get a win. I guess you do.
Not a big fan of high-waisted pants. But
Jack certainly was. You actually made him look good, I think. You look pretty good on him.
yeah?
I tried that, and people think it's funny.
Yeah.
Your grandma.
No one lets me what I do in my high.
Yes.
No one. Go ahead.
Out of all the creations he made, did he ever have an actual favorite that he liked to do the most?
Well, that's a great question. Well, he said that he said different things at different times, but one of the series that he most often named was Boys Ranch, which is a Western series that he did in the 50s. He would name that as one of his favorite things that he ever did. It's one of the few things that he probably wrote and penciled and inked a lot of. And it only lasted about 6 issues. So this series.
Wow, look at you.
Yeah, he was a big fan, and you see, this is Kirby mid-period, so he's still working in a kind of naturalistic style. It's much closer to sort of conventional standards of verisimilitude. I'm trying to avoid using the word realism because it's the most useless word
Look
in
how
vocabulary critical.
bendy and stretchy his stuff is here as opposed to the more blockish.
It doesn't, yeah, he
Most
doesn't
people
have
don't realize,
the
yeah.
wildly abstract look. It's and that's sort of almost like everything's been carved out of rock to the inking, the monumental quality that comes from him inking himself.
Most people don't realize that Jack Kirby understood anatomy very well. He was an excellent, realistic artist.
Oh.
But when you understand how something really looks like, then you can make infinite interpretations. I tell that to students all the time. Don't try to copy Jack Kirby. Learn how the body really is and make infinite interpretations. Make your own interpretations. Use Jack Kirby as inspiration.
These figures are essentially in proportion, and that's essentially perspective. These are things that he would stop doing as he became more cosmically inclined.
But some people don't think that Jack Kirby understood anatomy.
Right.
Yeah,
But his
'cause-
anatomy is so wonky
Oh,
because he
he-
wanted it to be.
Yeah, he eventually
Yes.
would exaggerate things. When you see a superhero character whose hand is like giant here and their foot back here is teeny tiny,
Which everybody
that's
does.
Kirby.
I did it right there. That's Kirby. And if anybody's reaching like that, that's the Kirby splay, we call it.
He made the characters just get right in your face.
And they actually, in terms of even the amount of space they take up in a panel, that starts to change. I mean, this goes back to how his style evolves. A lot of creators, Gil Kane, for example, I read an interview with him once where he said this was his favorite period of Kirby. And if you look at the figure drawing, it's all anatomically correct, and there's a lot of, he calls it air around the figures, there's actual space around the figures. Whereas by the time he's doing Fourth World,
everything is filled.
Yeah, every element is filled, and even a double-page spread doesn't seem like enough room for the things that he's trying to do.
Oh, jeez, no kidding.
And everything is being cut off at the panel's edges and on the regular panel pages. So, Darkseid might be holding up his hand and splaying out his fingers, but the panel will actually cut off the top of the fingers because there just isn't enough room. These are all, to say they're conscious choices, I don't know, but they're certainly, it's a sign of how his style was evolving.
Now, the only video documentation we have of him actually drawing, it showed him actually drawing a big old hand in the corner, and then he went on all the way to the other part of the corner.
Right.
And he started drawing all around the page, and he started building these foregrounds into a background, and just going, what the, jeez. It was amazing.
You have that Devil Dinosaur double-page spread?
No, because no, that wasn't impressive enough. I had the Boys Ranch thing. I got a
I was
dinosaur.
impressed that the Boys Ranch was there, yeah.
There's a book called Kirby 100, and they asked, I think, 100 different artists what their favorite page was, or to pick a page they'd like to talk about. And the one that Mike Royer, who was to be here, the one he picked is now referred to as the Glory Boat, and it's the one that I had asked. I said, well, I'll do that one. And they said, oh, Mike Royer already picked that one. I'm like, oh. So I ended up doing Bug, which ended up being more appropriate. But in New Gods, it's this amazing full-page splash of the two main characters, Light Ray and Orion, on this thing, and it's just coming right at you. There's page after page after page of Kirby stuff that you could just make a big mural out of and love it for the rest of your life.
It was stolen from the San Diego Comic Con several years ago, that page.
Really?
The Glory Boat is a lost page, so if you ever see,
Yeah,
anyone ever
lost page.
invites to show you that one, it's one of the lost pages.
I remember somebody asked Jack Kirby once, why do you put those squiggly lines on there? Is that, because I think it looks good? And that kind of immediately go, so when people ask me, why'd you do that? I just answered that way. I kind of like the way it looks. There's
Yeah.
no reason. Why'd you make that line go?
It feels right.
Look at that there.
There's
That's
so
a
much
nice one.
instinct.
Yeah, that's Eternals, right?
That's Eternals.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
It's so instinctual.
Again, Eternals, Marvel is still harvesting off, and this wasn't a very popular title for Marvel.
And this is Kirby coming back to Marvel after the whole fourth world stuff.
But Marvel still references, and Marvel still uses. I mean, it was just in
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Guardians of the Galaxy. They just keep
Celestials.
on going back to this rich pool of goodies to keep on. I guess they bought it, but I still call it.
Well, it goes back to that question, when I was trying to think about how I would answer that question of what a favorite Kirby story is, and
Okay.
it's impossible for me to answer, and that's partly because people also ask me, what Kirby should I read? Okay, so this guy's great, you convince me, you show people some pictures, okay, what should I read? And it's actually really hard to say because it's a totally different era of comic book production. Kirby was penciling and generally not inking his own work. He was creating characters he generally didn't own, and he was producing narratives out of his own head and not even looking back at the published works. And this is also during a period where comics are still, the kinds of comics he did are still primarily seen as having, the average age of the audience member is about 13. That's the presumption. So you can try and do, aim at a very bright 13-year-old and have the Galactus trilogy and tell a story about gods.
I'll be back.
All right. See you.
Sorry.
You said that kind of Kirby-like, wow.
Yes, I'll be back. He shall return. But you can try and educate that 13-year-old or aim above their heads. But what you can't necessarily do, you can't use adult language, adult concepts, you can't show Reed and Sue in bed together, right? So all kinds of constraints within which he was working. And for me, the best way to read Kirby, if you are a contemporary comics reader and you grew up reading, Ed Brubaker or Brian Bendis or Alison Bechdel or something, is that you have to approach it in the same way that you would approach classic 1930s movies as somebody who's only ever seen 21st century films. You've got to open up your head a little bit and not come in with the contemporary standards. And a lot of the time, I don't think you should even, and definitely try and not look too much at the words. The trick is to look at the pictures. I read Kirby, I think the best way to read Kirby is just to, you open it up, wherever it is, and you sit with it for a while.
Soak it in, yep.
And that, and in a way, go back to the way a very young reader would approach it. To think of him as, it's picture books. That's what these are. And if he hadn't been a comic book artist, he probably would have done children's picture books, where the whole point is very few words and an image, but you're not, as a child reading that material, going to turn the pages quickly. You're going to spend a lot of time with an image. So for me, that is the way to read him. And so I can say what my favorite Kirby comic is, all of them, because that's how to. I don't actually read them. I just look at them.
It's kind of, I'll look at it, then if it's cool, I'll read it, and every Kirby comic I went back and I read after I skimmed all the cool images.
Yeah.
Pretty much. Can anybody stump Ben? Yes.
So out of all his iconic characters, what would you think he would think is his most iconic?
Well, I don't know what he would say to that. I mean, I know that at different periods, besides mentioning Boys Ranch for much of his career as one of his favorite things, often then what he would say his favorite thing was whatever he was working on right then, which I think is the way a lot of artists are. In terms of iconic looking stuff, I think the Silver Surfer is about as, because it's so goofy and yet it works. That's probably one of the most repeated images, the one that you're most likely to see as a tattoo or a blacklight poster or something ever since he came up with the idea. People like the surfer.
Want to have some fun on this one. Can anybody stump Mike without prompting from Laura? Watch, they work together so well. They've got these signs, they're baseball signs. If you hear a cough, it's a signal about any character he's created or worked on. Can anybody stump him about any information about that?
Steve,
Mike
AKA Grape.
Meyer lives in Medford.
You want his address?
Did you, I guess, did he know Karl Barks, and were they contemporaries at all?
Probably
He worked
did,
in
right?
He lived in Oregon too.
You don't get a win, because
He
that's
lived
not
in-
anything he created.
He
but
lived
it's a
in
great
Grants
question.
Pass.
Well, Karl Barks lived in Grants Pass.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did they know each other? Was there an influence?
I'd be surprised if they didn't know each other,
Right.
being so
It's
close.
interesting that they were right here.
Yeah.
Well, when did we even find out that Barks did the books that we all liked, right? That's quite late. Mike was saying earlier about, putting the names of comic creators on the books wasn't something that was done for a long time.
Mhm.
If it was a Disney book, it was never done and is still not done. I mean, as far as I know, it'd be very reasonable if they did. For all of Karl Barks's career, it said by Walt Disney on all of those, all of those books. So he might have, I can imagine, he might know Karl Barks and not know he's Karl Barks right up until at least the 80s.
Nice question. Of all the characters that you've worked on, which one's Laura's favorite?
That's a good question.
Cue him. Why don't you two work together? Too long.
It would probably be iZombie, right? Didn't you?
Don't, man.
I don't know.
My favorite is what I'm working on at the time, like, right now, I was crying at the end of Silver Surfer, so it's whatever.
That was a pretty great series.
But I
Who asked
love
that question?
iZombie.
That was a great question.
Thank you.
Well,
I needed it.
the lead character in iZombie actually modeled after Laura. It's a mixture of Debbie Harry, of Blondie,
Yes.
Michelle Pfeiffer, and Laura. Those were my inspirations for our girl zombie.
Who can name 5 Mad Men characters?
Name one.
Somebody name besides Mad Men. Yeah, or Joe.
You took the two main
I
ones
can't make it
away.
too easy, but I can't. Someone in the back goes, there's a character named Joe in that. What? Ken, is that you?
No.
Thought I heard your voice.
Elastigirl. She was in Madman, right?
Who?
Elastigirl was not.
I thought the Atomics
Was it?
were in.
Elastigirl. There's 2 Elastigirls, Doom Patrol and The Incredibles.
And
My-
Mr.
Mr.
Gum.
Gum, I'm sorry.
He had Mr. Gum.
Mr. Gum,
Mr. Gum.
that's what I was thinking.
All right. Name 2 characters.
Dr. Bofus.
Bofus.
It's fired.
Close enough.
Unless you live in Boston. Burford's.
I like Bofus. I'm gonna change it to Bofus.
Hey, I like that Dr. Bofus.
That's,
He's
Yeah, that
a
Dr.
classy
Bofus.
guy. I'll
that's
tell you.
good.
Name 2 characters that Madman has actually crossed over with in the comic book.
Bill and Ted.
That'd be amazing.
There's a
That'd be-
red character with sawed off horns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hellboy?
Hellboy.
Hellboy?
Give me one more.
Guess who I'm hinting at?
And then you mentioned the other one.
Yeah.
You already mentioned
Oh, geez, that's right.
Clark.
Have you not looked at the first
Griswold.
Madman?
Holiday Road. Holiday Road.
Name 1 character from the Atomics.
Gum.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's our
So-
alpha alien with camera.
Not only will we be going through lots of facts, showing lots of illustrations, I would like a lot of participation from you, lots of questions, but also I'll be giving away lots of goodies. Goodies? What does that mean? Yay! It's for me to decide. And for you to say,
Your
that's
retail
awesome.
price, $19.
Says it right there. Says it on the box. One
For
person I
you,
want to thank
free.
big time. Okay. Who has been to Blue Moon Books over, is it Barger?
It's the Y Shopping Center.
Help me out, Don. Donna, help me out.
West Sixth.
Should I embarrass you a little bit?
No.
No? Guys, this is Donna. She's the awesome lady from Blue Moon Books. She gave us a whole lot of goodies to give to you about Jack Kirby. Let's give a round of applause for Donna. Blue Moon Books. I really want to make sure that we support the local comic shops, and she's got the best local comic shop. You know why?
Why?
Because her store is enormous, but the warehouse filled with old comics behind it is really awesome.
Huh.
If you need something, Donna will get this really excited look, and then she'll go to the back, and she usually finds it. And I found out why. It's a warehouse
And
of
it's the
goodies.
only place in town you can get super cool Marvel posters like this.
So Donna was very gracious, very helpful, so I want to make sure that, let's go grab some comics from Donna. And doesn't everybody win when you grab comics from Donna? Donna, that's your slogan. Doesn't everybody win when you grab comics from Donna? Can I make that sign? Can I put that in your store? So there. Shall I gush a little bit about our panelist?
No.
Everybody just say yes, yes. I would love to hear. Oh, gosh, yes. Okay. Because they're humble, I want you to watch. Their faces while I get gushing. Well, here's the thing: is I'm good friends with both these gentlemen, and they are. But then I look up this stuff, all the stuff they've done and contributed, and you guys are kind of cool. I just gotta tell you. I go, good heavens! I know these people. That's pretty neat. Let's begin. All right. Ben Saunders, besides singing the most amazing rendition of Fat Bottom Girls I've ever heard. Ever. He probably doesn't remember that, but he had amazing pants on. That's all I know. Let's talk about some publications Ben Saunders. Okay? Ben Saunders has written some books. Who knew? Comic Book Apocalypse, Do the Gods Wear Capes? Rock Over the Edge. Written numerous articles. I don't want to say that last name.
Desiring Dunn.
Done. See, I was going to say Donnie, and I knew that wasn't right. He specializes in 2 fields, literature of English Renaissance and the history of British and American comics and cartoons. I went to 2 of his classes so far, and the greatest thing I get to see is a room full of college students and their course books. Is this? It's the best class ever! And it absolutely blows me away, the information in those classes. You've been to quite a few of those.
I did a whole semester.
I would just sit there. And I thought I knew what I was talking about. He's expanded his portfolio to include curatorial work, Organized 3 major comics exhibitions. Who has been to the JSMA, the Schnitzer Museum on the U of O campus?
Yes.
Who has seen the 3 comic book exhibitions he's put together? It's possibly the greatest days of my life right there, seeing that stuff. Okay. Such as a massive tribute to EC Comics, a comic book apocalypse, and I'm missing one here.
Oh, well, I did the superheroes one, and there's a Charles Schultz one. The
Charles
superhero-
Schultz one. Oh, there's 4.
There's, well,
Or
comic book
this.
apocalypse happened in a different university, but there's 3 here.
Yeah. Ben also is a speaker all around the world at conventions, universities, and he always teaches me something new because he's kind of smart about this stuff. And again, I thought I knew what I was talking about with this stuff. And then there's my good friend Mike Allred. All right, here we go. We got about 45 minutes. It's going to take that to go through this. Mike Allred has contributed, I think, to. Have you drawn everything in comic books? Okay. With his excessively awesome wife, Laura Allred. Dead Air, graphic music, Creatures of the Id, The Everyman, and then my favorite, Madman 1, 2, 3. Does anybody see the first Madman series? Has anybody not seen it? Get out your pens, write that down. Go pick up that trade paperback. It's one of my favorites of all times.
It has flip action corners.
It has flip action corner. Come on! Sandman, Madman, Superman, Red Rocket 7, another one of my favorites. He drew a little picture of me in it. And Brian's in there. You're the roadie, or? Yeah, that was awesome. I totally forgot that. I read it again. I go, oh, it's Brian, and I made that sound. Oh, it was on a plane too. The Atomics, Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, X-Force, Catwoman, Ecstatic, Solo. Oh, jeez, iZombie. Did you guys know he crit? See, that's what I did right there. Oh. I might have some iZombie figures. Batman, Silver Surfer, Bug. Oh, there are 5 pages. Let's keep going. Good heavens. Marvel Knights, Jersey Gods, Spider-Man. Oh, the Fantastic Four. Oh, jeez, criminy. Did you guys know he does more, too? Mallrats, Chasing Amy. Skyscape. He wrote Astro West and G-Men from Hell. Has anybody seen Astro West? It's the greatest movie ever.
Starring him.
I want you all to look over at that guy. You get to
He
see
bit my
him.
face off. He bit my face off. Giant cow tongue.
And an eyeball. Ah! It was amazing. Shot right here in Eugene. That's also where we found out that you shouldn't be running around town with guns. Jeez.
Well, you used to be able to.
You used to. All you had to do was just kind of call up. We're going to be running around with guns. They're fake. Oh, thanks for telling us. I'm serious. That was.
That's how it works.
And the police were so calm. They come over there. Hey, you guys got some guns? It was like that. Oh, well, they're just this is what. Well, make sure to tell somebody. I swear. Could you imagine doing that now? Knives running through the sewers. It's incredible. Astro-esque. Write that down and smoke it while you're at it. Because we are in Eugene. Let's go for some others. Guys, he also, he's a musician too, just so you know. He has his own band, The Gear, with his sons. And one of his sons' wives. And anybody else play? Because he could probably get up on stage with them. And he's the finest karaoke-er. Is that the word? Karaoke-er? Karaoke-esque. Right. So these are going to be the guys that I'm going to lambaste with a lot of questions. You're going to lambaste with a lot of questions. And through that, I'm going to lambaste you with lots of goodies. And what do we define as goodies? Whatever I decide is goodies for you. So there. That's our esteemed panel. Again, going around right now is Mike Royer is very, very sick. Anybody met him? A little bit here, a lot here. He doesn't feel well today. So he wasn't able to be here, but we're going to see if we can get him down here for another occasion. And so the first thing I'd like to do is I want to start going through, I'm going to show you a few images. And what we're going to do is I'll probably have Ben initially say an initial little something about Kirby, because I was going to write a bunch of stuff, and I'm going, but Ben's going to be here, and he probably could just tell you a little bit about Jack Kirby. Is anybody not familiar with Jack Kirby? I'm so happy your hands didn't go up. Okay. But Ben, would you mind just going and saying a little introduction about Jack Kirby? and we'll get this cooking?
Sure.
Oh,
So
thanks.
that's Jack at the drawing board right there. And I think that's obviously later in life, he'd already at this point probably created, let's see, so early on, he co-created Captain America and the Golden Age version of the Vision with Joe Simon. He invented the entire genre of romance comics with Joe Simon in the 1950s. When he was in his 40s and in mid-career, he had already created characters that if he had died at that point would have made him a very significant figure in comic book history. He then reinvented the superhero with a collaborator named Stan Lee at Marvel Comics, where he was responsible for the first story's design conception of such characters as the Marvel version of Thor, the original X-Men, all of the characters in the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, and all the characters associated with the Fantastic Four for the first 100 issues, including the Silver Surfer and the Inhumans and the Black Panther, the Incredible Hulk. Who am I forgetting?
Iron Man?
Iron Man.
Should we just read every Marvel character?
Ant-Man.
Drew the very first Spider-Man cover?
The cover of the very first issue of Spider-Man. Ditko drew a cover, and Lee rejected it, saying that he thought that, for a cover anyway, he wanted Jack on the first issue. And that is Private Jack Kirby, because besides creating all these extraordinary comic book creations, Jack Kirby is one of the few comics artists who also actually killed Nazis. He probably was more, well, he definitely was more traumatized by these experiences than I think. I think the understanding of PTSD has only grown since then. Kirby saw combat, was definitely harrowed and traumatized by it, and I think spent a lot of, actually when Captain America comes back in the 1960s, when he's brought back by Kirby, he comes back as a PTSD sufferer. It's one of the reasons that Cap is always flashing back to, well, there are times when you read Kirby stories from the 60s of Cap where you actually can't tell whether it's a memory or a flashback or what's going on, because the Cap is traumatized by World War II. There you go. The only real politics I knew was that if a guy like Hitler, I'd beat the stuffing out of him and that would be it.
I'm gonna hang that on my wall.
It is a good one, yes. American heroes punch Nazis. They don't call them fine people. They punch them.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, that's a
Glamour
nice young,
shot.
I've never seen that
That's
yet.
something, huh?
Yeah, that's a nice
Hey.
young Jack. Never seen that one before. Of course, Jack Kirby was not his given name at birth. His given name was Jacob Kurtzberg. He was born in 1917 in the Bowery in the Lower East Side.
Making this year.
Yes, making this year 100 years of Jack.
Is there a special event for, I mean,
There have been all year.
That'd be
okay,
nice,
all year,
but-
okay.
But,
he's- stuff like that.
Did you get it right?
You got it?
Oh, Mark Schultz.
Mark Schultz.
All right, now back in business.
And Steve Ditko, by the way, I did ask him to draw Madman for me, and he said, no.
Yeah. That's a surprise.
One of my favorite experiences was actually being in contact with Steve Ditko.
Really?
There's only 2 known photographs of that guy. The man who created Spider-Man was Stan Lee.
There's some more just come out recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah, from the studio in the 60s.
Huh.
From the studio he shared with Eric Stanton, the BDSM artist.
Huh.
Yeah.
I always thought that was really cool. So early on in my career, I tried really hard not to let my picture get taken. It was impossible. And I know now in this day and age, but Ditko just doesn't show up anywhere.
No, it's true. The few pictures that do exist are from that one. They're obviously from the same time that somebody got into that
It's
studio
that
with the
Bigfoot
camera.
picture. They're all blurry and.
And there's his high school yearbook picture. And he looks,
Really?
yeah, he looks exactly like Peter Parker.
Huh.
Exactly. I mean, Ditko's Peter Parker is Ditko. There's no question.
Got it. So Google Steve Ditko's high school photo.
If you Google Steve Ditko high school yearbook, you'll see it right away.
He's our industry's J.D. Salinger.
Yeah. Only not as nice.
Was Salinger nice?
I think Salinger's probably nicer than Ditko.
Hmm.
Ditko's a good, cranky old man.
Yeah.
If only he was here.
Almost longer?
It's,
Let's go
oh,
five.
yeah.
Kids are getting restless.
Let's go 5 minutes. Who's restless for hot dog bites and macaroni and cheese balls?
Now I want chicken.
I love any food with the name balls on the end. Is that Yes.
On that note,
It took a few seconds, but Ben got that one.
Yeah.
Good heavens. Any additional questions for these awesome people? Comments about how handsome they are? Way in the back, I haven't heard from you. Oh,
Jack Kirby, can I say, did Jack Kirby ever draw Superman?
Yes, but they redrew it for him.
they redrew his face.
Yes. MES. Who did all the redraws on that?
Kurt Swan?
Yeah, was it
was
Swan?
Kurt Swan?
Yeah, it might have been. It was
What were
definitely.
some of these? So Jimmy Olsen, what else?
So, yeah, that would have been but that's the most obvious place to look for a Kirby Superman is the Jimmy Olsen run during the Fourth World period at DC. But the face was considered not on model, so it was redrawn. Because, Michelangelo had to go through that too. When
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
When he drew the final judgment and all the figures were naked, a later pope came along and said, they're all naked. And they had a painter put little bits of gossamer over all the genitals.
And Jack Kirby drew a story about that.
It happens.
Just fake news, I'm throwing it out. Fake news.
People redraw the greatest artists.
Absolutely. Let me tell you a story. Let's go 2 more questions. Or comments. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about Kirby's influence on the different
Everybody.
romance comics?
Mm-hmm.
He didn't just do
Created the romance comic.
Yeah, pretty much
Yeah.
invented the genre of the romance comic. We mentioned that earlier, but we didn't say much about it.
Yeah.
He does. There's still punches get thrown in his romance comics. Even then, of course, he was quite partial to the occasional fight scene breaking out in the romance comics. But yes, that was actually their biggest hit since Captain America, and in between Captain America and his Marvel creations, probably his romance comics were his best-selling things.
And because of that, very subversively, our recent run on Silver Surfer is a romance comic. We wanted it to be a romance comic. We didn't say that's what it was going to be or that's what it was. But now that it's over, it's very clear that that's exactly what it is. It's a cosmic romance comic.
It's one of the things that he brought to the superhero genre in the 60s, actually, when you think about it. I mean, the fact superheroes don't get married, and then he created the Fantastic Four, and the plot of whether Reed and Sue will get married or whether Submariner will come between them is absolutely out of a romance comic. There's Reed, he's reliable, he's a bit older, maybe he's a bit boring. There's Submariner, he's mysterious, he's arrogant, he's a bad boy, he's foreign. It's all these. That's all classic romance now. Who will Sue choose?
One of the secret ingredients of Marvel's success in the 60s was that soap opera quality that serialized the stories as opposed to the one and dones which DC was doing.
Yeah. Continuity, as long as they could remember.
Has anybody seen some of the pages that Kirby drew for The Prisoner?
I'm doing a cover for a reprint of that right now.
Well, there were a bunch of pages that weren't inked or finished. Somebody hired Mike Royer to recreate all of those, take scans of the pencils. So somebody owns a fully inked copy of that story, which I'm kind of going, so you may want to
And
talk
if you're
to
not
Mike
familiar with
about
The
it.
Prisoner, it's a super cool 17-episode series from the 60s. It's so great. You hunt it down.
Last question. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned earlier that Kirby was trying to build a mythology and that Stan humanized the characters. Was that something that that was very intentional, him going into, because the characters that he's created, and you wrote a book about it, right? About how superheroes are sort of our modern myths. That was something that, did he know he was doing at the time, or was it something that did he ever look back and go, I can't believe that it became as part of our
Probably never
culture
did.
as it is?
I think that, Kirby was very interested in myth. He was interested in Norse myth and in Greek myth and I think one of the things that I don't know if, he doesn't strike me as the sort of immodest type, not somebody who would sit there imagining one day I will be recognized as a modern myth maker.
You think
But
Stan Lee was?
I think what they both had in common, actually, is an extraordinary faith in the medium at a time when most people called them funny books. And the idea that you could tell a story about what happens when superheroes meet God. What happens when you meet a being like Galactus whose morality is so beyond the conventional good versus evil morality of a standard superhero narrative. That most people just didn't think that you could do that in this genre in this way. And both Jack and Stan, to their credit, I think, seem to have really believed in the potential, the storytelling potential of the medium. So that now no one, I think, unless they're unless they just don't read comics, most people nowadays would accept that this is an extraordinary medium that can tell any kind of story. But at the time, that was not a way even a lot of creators felt. It was a way of making money and paying the rent and entertaining children. And I think Stan and Jack shared a vision of what the medium could be.
Guys, macaroni balls await. But besides that, I super want to thank Donna from Blue Moon Books for giving us a bunch of goodies to hand out for you fabulous folks. I'll be getting an email when I announce who wins the original Dark Side piece.
Does that make you, does it go on?
Yes. And Dragonvine Comics, who gives the iZombie figures and a bunch of fun tchotchkes for you guys. Dragonvine's here at the convention. Again, I'll send some to you when I announce who wins the... Also, that thingamajiggy I handed out to you.
Thank you, everybody.
Please give me 10 minutes to head back to the booth so I can tell Jim. If you stop by my booth and you actually want to buy a print, instead of $20 a print, you can have $5 per print if you show him that. I'm going to tell him. Anybody shows you that, they get $5 per print, okay?
Thank you, Matt Brudich, for organizing this.
Oh.
That was so long.
I know. Hey, thanks for watching the panel with Mike Allred. What? And Ben Saunders. Come on down and watch some other panels. Come join us to the next Yukon. Let's do some things. Let's buy some stuff. Let's throw some Kirby at some people.
Yeah.